Welcome back. First hour here. Our first big story this morning starts from the past week, where Nigerian customers have faced significant banking service disruptions, with many unable to access vital banking apps, process payments, or conduct simple transactions. The root cause stems from banks switching to new core banking applications as part of their system upgrades, they say. While these changes are intended to enhance digital banking service long-term, they're causing short-term inconveniences that are crippling businesses and leaving customers frustrated. These service interruptions are becoming disturbingly frequent, like the national power grid, not only with banks, but also with telecommunications providers. Telcos, once seen as reliable, have been plagued by network issues, leaving customers with no viable alternatives, as most networks suffer from similar disruptions. This raises concerns about customer rights and a protection mechanism in place to address these occurring, or rather recurring, challenges.
So joining us to explore these issues in depth, we have Uti Ellu. She is a customer experience professional and consumer protection advocate. And Uti will help us understand the critical points around customer experience, especially during this time. Uti, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you for coming on. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
We'll also be discussing about these disruptions that we've experienced, and also what protections that, if any, is available for consumers. But let's get started, shall we? Can you explain the primary reasons behind the service disruptions experienced by banks, and whether this was, in some sense, avoidable?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So the service disruptions are extremely unfortunate. I want to say that they aren't avoidable. So the core banking application, if I was to try to describe it akin to something more relatable, it would be like the engine of a car. So you would agree that if the electricals in a car weren't working, you could still move the car. But when the engine isn't working, or you have to work on the engine, and in such a case where you're actually replacing that engine, you're taking it out and putting in a new one, then there's no way you can drive the car at that point in time. So it is not possible to avoid a disruption when you're changing a core banking application in the way that we've seen in the industry recently. What it is really about how you manage the discomfort that comes along with, making alternative plans. So if I can't get into my car and drive, what alternative plans are available for me to move around? So that would be the easiest way to try to explain that. So really what we expect is that in the run-up to these types of significant changes, that customers have all the information they need. One, they know how long this change is going to take. And then secondly, they know what their alternatives are. Do I need to take out cash beforehand? Do I need to use a secondary account in another bank? Thankfully, in this part of the world, most people are already accustomed in this industry to having bank accounts in multiple places to address these types of service challenges. So it's really about the preparation in the run-up, the communication during and after. Because again, just if I stick with my initial analogy, if you put in a new engine in your car, you start the engine, it's most likely going to start. Sometimes it doesn't even start, but then sometimes you do start it, and then you find out that something's not working quite as it should. There's a lot of fine-tuning and tweaking that also happens, which typically you can't see until you put in the new engine in and you turn it on. Then you have to start, the fine-tuning, the tweaking. Sometimes you realize, this engine isn't quite the right one. You've got to go back and do significant work. The ideal thing is that you turn it on and then you're just tweaking, you're just fine-tuning. But that sometimes also doesn't happen. It is quite unpredictable what can happen when you make these changes and turn the system back on.
Well, we've also got someone join us on this conversation. He just came in through the back door. He insisted to be in this conversation. And of course, Devo Okorie, social analyst and commentator. Devo, you are a customer, and you experienced some of these. How frustrated did this leave you, and do you think that this could have been avoidable?
Yes, as a customer, I represent the 200 million Nigerian citizens on both the banking space, as well as the telecommunications space, as well as the petroleum PMS buyer space, as well as the clearing of goods space that we face with customs, as well as the port services at the airports, as well as the poor distribution of power. Just to add to it, Mazino, when we were on air yesterday, Nigeria went through its third grid collapse in a week while we were speaking. So it's not been easy for users, consumers of all manner of services within the last 2 or 3 months. It's just literally been hectic. You're trying your best to even maintain some level of sanity. I mean, just look at the banks, how a few of them who were upgrading their software ended up starting the process without even informing customers. And I remember that big popular bank that Judith was referencing. By the time I got there, because I noticed I had some international transactions that were hanging, it took almost 3 days for transfers to go through. By the time I got to the bank, just to confirm, because my parties on the other side were wondering what's going on, then someone in the bank whispers into my ear that we're going through an upgrade. And I'm like, geez, you know what Uti was referring to, the service disruptions that come with upgrades. Why didn't you inform customers so that we could manage it alongside with you? I know most banks do not like to lose money, but what did I have to do? Because I know the upgrade process, and it has to do with testing and ensuring that everything is okay. Some apps and some et cetera will not work as expected. I had to move my money from that bank. I know banks don't like to hear that, but the truth is I need to continue with my life. I had to move my money out so that I would still have some level of sanity. Come to the telco operators. I mean, I've been traveling a lot around Nigeria lately, and in terms of data stability, sometimes you don't even get service. When we were traveling by road, a lot of the base stations are not working, so you go through different gaps of network freezing. And what happens if I'm in a frozen network zone and those friends of ours that we don't like show up, and I'm referring to bandits? Who do we call at that point? And that's even an extreme scenario. Just about normal living, you want to talk or communicate as usual, and you can't get across to people. In terms of payments, you know the mess that takes place with payments when literally all the POS systems are not working, your internet platforms are not working, the banks are hanging. I mean, this is almost a relapse, although it's not as extreme as what happened during the last administration when Emefiele was running that policy that crashed all the banking networks. I mean, it's just a whole lot for citizens to cope with.
Now, listening to you, Devo, one thing that is certain is communication, and also how to minimize the frustration, and very importantly, the mistrust or the trust deficit that consumers have with these brands, whether it's telcos, whether it's bank. So let me come to you, Uti. You are a communications expert as well, and you're an advocate for consumer protection. How should, not just banks now, but also telcos communicate with their customers during such disruptions? Because they happen very often. It's not just a protracted time. Sometimes you might be in a dire situation, and all of a sudden you can't even be able to make transactions, and even the POS can't even help you, or the ATMs can't help you because the services are down. How can they be able to communicate with their customers better, effectively, to minimize frustration, and most importantly, for them to trust them?
Yeah. Trust is a really big issue. I think that's the hole that both industries are trying to dig themselves out of. To be fair, Nigeria doesn't particularly engender trust in Nigerians, right? So that is a key challenge. Now, when it comes to communication, it's interesting, right, that Devo talks about this one particular bank and he says he didn't get communication. But I got communication from the same bank. And for me, that speaks to one core challenge, which is data. Now, we take for granted the challenges that we have here in terms of data accuracy, phone numbers being available, email addresses being available, because to be able to communicate with someone, I have to have the right information for you. That's the first hurdle. Then I need to have someone who's actually going to read their communications. If I was to ask any of you, when was the last time you opened an email from either your bank or your telco? 9 out of 10 times when I ask people, maybe only 15%, 20% at best actually open those communications. They go, oh, I see them, right? But they don't open them. And the fact is, to communicate with you, you have to engage with the communications. So that's another challenge. No organization, no, in fact, I don't believe, like I said, for all of these organizations we've talked about, at least the ones that I use, I've seen those communications. So typically what happens is communications will go out. A very small percentage of customers will interact with them, which means that the information gets lost. And usually it's not till, just like Devo said, I'm in the middle of it. I go then to a branch and I get told, oh, this is happening. So there's a lot of information, even in the run up to that, branches were being closed. I know that for one, when it comes to the telcos, I'm a culprit. They said so many SMSs come out. It's like your phone's being bombarded. You just stop reading them, right? So there is a challenge in communicating there, where even when communication is sent, there's only a small percentage of customers who actually interact with those communications, which means that the larger percentage goes into this with the mindset that nobody told me. Right? So the core for these organizations is, how can I try to reach as many customers as possible? I leverage the data that I have, I leverage all the touch points that I have, whether it's digital or physical, and I leverage my human resources, all of my people going out there spreading the word. Devo said something that was really critical, which is, we don't want you to take your business elsewhere. But the truth is, when communication is managed right, customers know what's happening. They can plan ahead, and when you're done, they come back to you.
Right.
But when you feel like as a customer that you haven't had any communication, you haven't had any information, odds are you move your money, you move to another alternative provider, and you don't come back.
Uti, but in situations where, for example, I'm going to cite a very recent case where there was supposed to be a system upgrade, and the specific time was given for that system upgrade, but unfortunately it was extended.
Exactly.
I don't think there was communication at the time it was going to be extended, for how long it was going to be extended for, and it's still on. I'm being informed now that it's still ongoing.
Yeah, I still haven't gotten my 155,000.
Still hasn't got his 155,000 naira. So what happens then in situations like that where it's unfortunate that the brands or the telcos or the banks or the upgrade that they're doing is taking a long protracted time? How can they communicate with consumers to bear and understand and also maintain trust?
So it really, again, is the same thing, right? So we have, if you're planning for this type of thing, you have communications pre, you have communications during, and you have comms post. So the reality of it is, planning something like this, right? You put the engine back in the car, you turn it on, the car starts, everything's fine, off on your merry way, great. If you put the engine back in, it starts, but not quite right. Your sending comes out. I remember for this same particular brand that we're talking about now, there was like an email that was a 3-hour extension to say, we said we'd be back at 9, but we're coming back at 12. The key thing with communication is consistency, right? Because communication is there to help you understand what's happening and plan alternatives. So really it's about being able to communicate. Now, one of the glitches there is sometimes, right, I've estimated that it's going to take me Friday till Monday. So I'm sort of going with a slightly off-peak period. And then I get to Monday, I turn it on, and it's not working properly, right? Then you go, okay, we think this is how long it's going to take to be able to fix this. Now, you may very well get to the end of that 3-hour extension and realize that you need a lot more time. Sometimes I will assume that in Mazzino's situation, other things are working, but there's that one particular transaction that's hanging in there somewhere because there's things that have happened whilst the engine was out of the vehicle. So the idea is the communication consistent? It must be. Sometimes it's difficult because you feel like they're having to send out communications back to back because things are changing so swiftly. The best practice is to continue to send something at least once every 24 hours whilst any issues are going on. Then sometimes you also have pockets of customers where, from a general perspective, this particular thing's fixed. But a handful of customers still have issues. Those particular customers, from their perspective, the issues haven't been fixed. Now you've got to also identify those types of customers. So targeted communication, consistent communication really is the key.
So I hear you there, and I want to come to Devo now. Devo used to run or head the communications department for a bank himself, if I remember correctly. Now, Devo, in these kinds of instances that we have just witnessed, especially during and after Customer Service Week, let's note that the use of human communication is very important, but we find that most of these banks or telcos actually have these robocalls that seem to frustrate the situation, taking you into a merry-go-round and eventually cutting you off, telling you that, sorry, we can't afford to, or we can't attend to your issue right now. Try again later, which is frustrating. What do you have to say about that, or anything that could be done regarding these customer service calls that really seem to go nowhere?
Well, the truth is, institutions will always do the little they can or the most that they can to engage with their daily customers on what kind of service level they're going to get, okay? I would say that they're not even the people we should have issues with. I want to call out where the problem lies. I think the regulators for most of these sectors have been found sleeping, okay? The regulators have one job: ensure delivery of service, be it banking services where you have the CBN, be it the airports that you have the NCAA, be it the port services, you have NIMASA, be it the telecoms communication services, you have the NCC, even broadcasting, you have the NBC. Now, most times we don't talk directly to the regulators, but we should be, just like the executive in government. Whenever they're derailing or they're going off track, we have the legislator to check the executive. And most cases in the oil industry, you have the NUPDRA, that's the Nigerian upstream, downstream. You also have regulatory agencies. Many of these agencies across the sectors are sleeping when it comes to service delivery. And this is not right. I mean, it shouldn't degenerate until we have to start having boxing matches, fisticuffs with some of these service providers before they begin to speak. What I expect is that, of course, we know there are service level agreements between the regulators and the service providers, whereby if at any point in time they cannot meet up, some level of communication is made. We need to be hearing from the regulators that, look, this is about to take place, or this industry has not been able to deliver this level of service. Therefore, this is the actions that we are taking. Or do not panic in terms of panic buying, in terms of fuel. These are the places that you can get fuel, especially when we're trying to fill in these gaps. We're not hearing enough from the regulators. And most times when we hear from the regulators, we hear political statements. We hear things that you can't really make one or two out of. Okay, take for example, because of the high cost of living, the government said, okay, pending when they can arrange enough supply of food or even pay the new salaries in terms of minimum wage, we're distributing rice. No one was held responsible. No one carried out the instructions from government that said that there will be a slash on rice distribution for people to buy. Nobody till date. Mazino, have you gotten bag of rice at 460,000? I don't know anybody that has. As regards telcos, how much has NCC said? Now, we also know that some of these industries are going through some challenges, like in telecommunications. Not only have they been fighting, the service operators have been fighting for tariff increase because of obviously the economic downturn. So what they've said is that they cannot maintain optimal service delivery with the low cost that they are getting. It's a fair argument. NCC has been talking to them and said they've refused a tariff increase, maybe because they feel telcos have made a premium return on investment a while back. But is that a sustainable position to take? What about talking to us consumers? Banks are going through upgrades to be able to improve their service. What has CBN told, consumers nationwide? What has the Federal Competition and Consumer Agency been saying regarding some of these service disruptions across board? We need to hear from the regulators.
Right.
They're sleeping.
And speaking of regulators, I'm going to come to you, Uti. You are also a consumer or customer, protection advocate. In situations like this, the absence of regulators who are able to come out and be vocal and protect their customers, I would like for you to speak on consumer confidence in these brands. When we see repeated failure of services, corporate services, whether it's telcos, even electricity, what happens to the consumer's confidence in these corporate services and their companies?
I think you just need to take a stroll down the social media streets and you can see the reality of that lack of confidence. And how it really comes through for me that is concerning is you fill in the gaps, right? I've seen everything from this organization is going under to are my funds safe to, and the sad part of it, if I take the telcos, for example, Devo has just said something that is every telco is experiencing the challenges. So consumer confidence, just like Nigerians' trust in our nation, is pretty low. The threshold is pretty low. And I think that this also impacts how they receive information. Because if I don't trust you, my assumption is that everything you're telling me is a lie, even if it's true. So it is a challenge. It does mean that there is a lot of clawing back and a lot of work that needs to be done by these organizations to really build trust. And you're not going to achieve it 100%. What it needs to be is that you're targeting the advocates that you have, that niche of loyal customers who have seen your capabilities in terms of managing their customer experience. So you don't expect today that you're not going to have issues with an organization, but you do expect that when you do, the way that it's handled leaves a longer lasting impression. And you then find that these are the people that when you go on social media, when everybody's slamming, when everybody's complaining, these few voices are the people out there going, no, this organization isn't like this. Oh, I had issues, they sorted it out. Oh, I'm fine. Every organization has to, that's the goal. Shoot for having advocates, shoot for having people who are voices that aren't influencers, that aren't influenced by you, only by the service that you've provided. And they carry a lot more weight in terms of who people will believe and who people will trust. But let's be very fair, let's be very honest. Every organization right now in these industries that we've talked about in sectors, they're coming from the back foot. Mm-hmm. Consumer trust is in the mud.
So how then can we ensure reliable services and just what role can consumer advocacy play in holding, I mean, you just talked about influencers, but, more, advocates for consumer protection, what role can they play in holding these companies accountable as well? Because it's one thing to vouch for them, it's another to hold them accountable and also to help build reliability in these businesses.
So the first thing is consumer education. A lot of customers don't understand what their rights are. They don't know what ways and opportunities they have to complain. Devo talked about the regulators. Most regulators have some sort of redress process. They have some sort of ombudsman process where consumers can actually write to them and they will take up the issues. Granted, it's quite slow a lot of the time, but they do take up these cases. The FCCPC does the same. So it's really for consumers to be aware of what their rights are and who they can go to complain. So for any of these industries, do you know who the regulator is? Do you know what their process is for getting redress? You will find that even on social media, you will find that people are tagging the regulators and they are also in turn reaching out to these organizations, asking what is going on. I think that one of the things that is a gap is that a lot of Nigerians just go, this is a problem, this is an issue, and then they don't do anything about it. So we complain to social media, we complain to our friends and family, we move on with our feet, we choose an alternative. But the truth is you're still working in the same industry, the same challenges, right? If you moved your funds from bank A to bank B and then bank B is going through the same service disruptions not long after, it feels like you're just going around this merry-go-round and there's no solutions. So consumer education is key. Know your rights, know the opportunities and avenues that you can get redress. Talk to the regulator. There are systems out there. Usually there's just a gap in knowledge of how to access it.
Well, thank you very much, Uti. Don't get used to abuse. That's what I got from that. In Nigerians, that's our culture. Speak out. I want to say thank you very much, Uti Ellu, and of course, Devo Korea, for joining us on this conversation, which we all suffered from during the week. And thanks for your input. And
also a call to regulators as well. If you're watching, this is the time for you to step up to also know that the regulators are playing a key role when it comes to protecting the consumers and their rights as well in situations like this. Once again, many thanks to you, lady and gentleman.
Thank you for having me.